Hey guys, Elizabeth Quid here again with Elizabeth's Scenes and Scents. Welcome back to my channel. Please don't forget to check out my website, which is waftingwonderfulwax.scentsy.us, where I am Liz Quinn, your star Scentsy consultant. So today what I have for you is a long-awaited May melting basket, which is a literary melting basket, hence the long gloves, the sort of kind of Regency hairdo, which took me forever, and all the other accoutrements to be able to bring you into the world of Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice. So we certainly need to be period appropriate with a little bit of very good tea. This is Buckingham Palace Garden Party. We're going to dive right on into the wonderful story through my melting basket of Elizabeth Bennet, her family, and her love. And this is quite fantastic, by the way. So first off, we really need to know our main characters. If you have never seen the movie Pride and Prejudice, the Keira Knightley version is probably the most popular, or you've not read the book, it is a shame. You really should spend the time to get to know these amazing characters. Anne of Green Gables, of course, was my first literary melting basket. Then I did one on a real person, which would have been Laura Ingalls Wilder, and that was Little House in the Big Woods. Then I did one last year, I believe, on The Secret Garden, which is one of my favorite childhood books. But Pride and Prejudice is most definitely the most mature novel of all of them and the greatest real heavyweight classic. So looking at being able to give you bars for these different characters and to try to tell you the story in as concise a way as possible was almost an unwielding and very overwhelming task, if I'm going to be honest. No other melting basket's been this challenging for me to try to get enough information together. So mostly I'm going to focus on the characters, bars that I think remind me of them, and then some of the more major settings, and just a few of the events that then of course lead us to a happy ending, which I think is why this book of all of Jane Austen's is the most popular. That and the incredible witty dialogue. If you are not into nuance and subtlety, you are going to completely miss the brilliance of the book and of the movies that they've produced to try to recreate it. So I am going to take off my beautiful white gloves because it's going to be one of those things where all of my wonderful clamshells are going to be popping all over the place because they're slippery already. So first off, we certainly do need to meet Elizabeth Bennet. And even though her name is the same as mine, I have had a little bit more of a personal soft spot for Anne and Anne of Green Gables as far as being like my character. Elizabeth Bennet is definitely more aloof. She is extremely opinionated. She's extremely intelligent. She is feminine and gracious, but she also has a very strong mind. So I had a really hard time figuring out what bar am I going to pick for her. So as a runner-up, Strength, which is currently even available in our Mother's Day collection, was nice. But when I smelled Cashmere Leaves, that was it. This was going to be the bar that I wanted to use for her because it's not extremely frou-frou at all, but it's still very feminine. It's warm, it's spicy, it has that crunchy leaf quality, and she loves to be outdoors. She likes to walk in the rain. She likes to take her thoughts outside and be able to kind of settle them in because there's always so much going on. It's very turbulent inside of her heart in this wonderful book. But this one I thought was the best because Elizabeth Bennet is a woman of great strength and substance. She's a little bit mysterious and difficult to figure out. And she's definitely not your typical frilly feminine female. So that was very good for her. Now, her sister, the oldest of all five, because the real conflict in this story, besides Elizabeth's heart, is that this family has 5 daughters, and they're not extremely wealthy. They're not dirt poor by any means, but they're not super wealthy. Having 5 dowries and marrying them off well is something that's weighing very heavily on the family. Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet, we'll get to them. They are definitely funny characters, but Elizabeth has 4 sisters. So the oldest one is Jane. Now Jane is the most beautiful. She's the most demure. She's a little bit on the shy side and she doesn't speak her mind like Elizabeth does. So her strength of character comes from her gentleness, and she has to learn through the course of the book how to stand up for herself and speak her mind, whereas Elizabeth almost has to go the other way. So I looked through my entire collection and I chose Flower Child for beautiful, sweet Jane. I also think Honey Pear Cider matches her personality too. But this is innocent. It is very gentle. You really have to lean into the bar to find all the nuances, and you need to put it in a small room. And that's kind of how Jane is, at least at the beginning of the book. And this pink is absolutely her color. Now, there are 3 younger sisters, and Mr. Bennett has pretty much given up on them. He dotes on his 2 oldest, doesn't really care for the other 3 as much, and of course, Mrs. Bennett's in a dither to get all of them married as quickly as possible. But the other one who's in the middle of the pack is Mary. Now, she's kind of sour, she's a little bit plain, she's the type where I'm sure if Jane Austen had been the sort to do a series, which is, I think, more of a later 20th century idea of taking something and then spinning it off in a million different directions, partly for merchandising, that maybe we would have had a book where Mary developed. But Dutch apple bread for me, and this is personal for this bar for me, is a little bit sour, a little bit less than perfectly attractive, kind of frumpy, and, you know, it does shine in the warmer on certain days, and Mary tries, but she's just not this beautiful, dazzling, wonderful woman to all the people around her, and she gets on her family's nerves, and that's how I feel about this bar. And then we have 2 other sisters, and there is a younger one who is the romantic of the family. She's headstrong, she's extremely beautiful, but not in the demure and self-controlled way that big sister Jane is. This one's a bit of a flirt. This is the one where I did not have a true Regency dress, but the Regency dresses come across with a big square or scoop cut right above the bust line. And at that time, you needed to put little bits of lace. They called it a lace tucker in for your modesty, and Lydia was always ripping out her lace. I wonder why. Anyway, I figured out that lush gardenia was the perfect bar for our flirtatious Lydia. So this definitely makes you think of womanly charms and flirtation, and it's beautiful, and that fragrance just goes everywhere and you cannot contain it. That's Lydia. So then last but not least is Kitty. Now Kitty is just very young, she's impulsive, she's silly, and I thought that Pink Sugarberry Mint would be a fantastic bar for her. There isn't a lot about her in the book, but she's there as a supporting character, and this is very full of frippery and fancifulness and bubbliness, and it's sweet with a little bit of tart, and I think that that really encapsulates the 5 sisters. So then we have Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and Mr. Bennet is a little bit sarcastic and a bit withdrawn because his wife henpecks him, but he does have a real great strength of character that you see in the way that he treats Lizzie and Elizabeth, or Lizzie and Jane, and he calls Elizabeth Lizzie because she is really his very favorite. And so there is something about him to be admired, and when I was looking through all of my masculine type bars, I think Hemingway, because Hemingway was certainly unconventional himself, and Mr. Bennet is very unconventional. No governess for the girls, no tight constraints of society, letting all 5 girls be out at once, which is partly a move of desperation by Mrs. Bennet, I'm sure, and all these things. But he still has a likability to him, even though he's a bit sour at times. And I really, really love Hemingway, which is all apples and wood and wonderful spices. Then we need to pick a bar for Mrs. Bennet, who is one of the most annoying, ghastly characters. But she really does love her girls. It's just her nerves. Her nerves get to her. I'm sure you all remember if you've seen the movie Mrs. Bennet and Her Nerves. So, what bar do I have that is sweet, but is very overwhelming and maybe grates on your nerves a bit, even though you try to like it? I feel like Amaretto is definitely that bar, or even Cloudberry Dreams, but I only had 2 somewhat rancid cubes of that left. Oh, so this is a bar that could be elegant and lovely if it would just be reined in a bit, which I'm sure Mrs. Bennet at one time had that opportunity. She's just well past that. So Amaretto, there's an awful lot going on in this bar, and it can be rather off-putting and can kind of grate on the nerves, just like Mrs. Bennet. So then we're going to go into all the men who are involved with these young women. So we have Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy, Mr. Wickham, and Mr. Collins, and they're all available to these young women at different times and in different ways. And of course, we know who our favorite is. And I have been thinking of this bar for, 3 years since I started the channel. There's only one bar for Fitzwilliam Darcy, which to me is not a very noble name, but he is the man of the book, and that is Mystery Man. The appeal of Darcy is that he is conflicted, he's a bit dark without in any way being evil, and he's just difficult. Oh, but he's a wonderful, charming mystery, and so is Mystery Man. This is definitely a cool bar, which goes very well with his personality. And it's not personally my favorite, but my favorite masculine cologne scent, I did not find a character that represented that in this book, so we didn't go there. But Mystery Man, oh, it's so nice with the crisp bergamot and all this, and I think it just is pitch perfect for Darcy, who, of course, at the end, we find out that his true nature is very generous, but he's perceptive, and he's not the type that's going to blab all over the place what he's doing behind the scenes for good. Anyway, that is Darcy. And then we have Mr. Bingley, Jane's Mr. Bingley. There's something toward the end of the book, and I'm not going to quote it perfectly, but it talks about how when Jane and Bingley do finally get together, that their generosity is going to allow every servant to be able to swindle them, but they aren't going to care because they're so sweet and kind. So, Mr. Bingley, Sandalwood Tangerine, I think fits him very well. It's pleasant, it's mild-mannered, it's not going to offend anyone, it's warm, it's sweet, goes nicely with Flower Child. They're not the most powerful and dynamic couple, but they are the couple with the gentle, kind, sweet hearts. So, and they're both a little bit timid and not quite super assertive, and they kind of dance around each other and make faux pas because they just don't know how to truly declare their love for one another because they're too shy. So I think Sandalwood Tangerine's pretty good for him. Now, we come to the most dashing man, the one who has the most flash, the one who has the most polish, but he's a cheat and a liar. So dashing is for Mr. Wickham, and it isn't that I don't love this bar, because I do. But this one, it has that little bit of a dandy. He's in the regiment. He wears his wonderful soldier's outfit where Lydia and Kitty are always trying to get to. I'm not sure which city it is. It might be Brighton, which is typically the one in Regency novels where the girls are all trying to go to get themselves a soldier. But this bar reminds me of Mr. Wickham. Now, the problem with Wickham is that Darcy knows him. And Darcy knows bad things about him, and Wickham lies and tells a lot of falsehoods about Darcy, but Darcy keeps his mouth shut about his own character until the end of the book or the end of the movie, whichever you prefer, where everything is proven out that Darcy is the man to trust, and Mr. Wickham elopes with Lydia, and that's not a good thing. So then we come to the most odious person. Even Mrs. Bennett pales in comparison to their dear cousin who's going to inherit the estate of all 5 of these girls, and they're all going to be disinherited because in Regency England, women didn't have rights to own property and all that the way we do now. I wanted to have something really terrible for Mr. Collins, who is also a minister, and that doesn't reflect on clergy in general, but it certainly did in this particular book. This smooth, oily, self-ingratiating man who comes in and tries to propose to Elizabeth because he's going to be taking the family home because he's the first in line that's a male that will inherit because he's a cousin. Oh, and of course she refuses him. He's just this absolutely awful, servile, I just can't even come up with enough bad adjectives for him. Anyway, Gleeful Grape is the worst bar I've got that I just cannot fix. Now, I wish I had a worse one, honestly, like casting spells or a couple of the others, but this is an odious bar that I cannot fix. It's just nasty, in-your-face grape that I don't think anything could tame, and that is very much like Mr. Collins. So he really has a talent for saying horrible things and mean things in all these flowery ways that are just, they're hilarious. You have to at least watch the movie if you never have. So that brings us to a very sweet character, which is Elizabeth's best friend. Her name is Charlotte, and she is now going on 27, extremely plain in the face because back then, and I know that books like to amp this up even more than real life, but being beautiful and young and charming was very important to marry well because you weren't, as a woman in the middle and upper classes, and really middle classes we know it didn't even exist, you didn't go get a job, you had to marry money. So this Charlotte, she's quite old for being marriageable. She doesn't come from any money, and she isn't beautiful on the outside. She's very beautiful on the inside. So I was trying to find a bar. She ends up marrying Mr. Collins because in her mind, he's the only one that will have her, and at least she'll have a little rectory where she can go and enjoy rearranging the furniture and not be living with her parents anymore. I don't know how she withstood that man, but, you know, she seemed to make it work. Anyway, Pinkberry Sandalwood is pleasant and sweet and kind, and definitely made me think of Charlotte, who is Elizabeth's best friend, and she really, really enjoys her. Where the two of them balance each other. Elizabeth is very opinionated, and she's sharp and she's quick, and Charlotte is one more to sit back and She, I think, has more depth than maybe Jane when it comes to sizing life up and people up, but she keeps her mouth shut and she thinks it through. So this is very good for Miss Charlotte. So I know that that's a lot of people. I know that there's just so much going on, but this is one of those books where if you don't know the characters and you don't understand the dialogue and the repartee, that's the soul of the story. So there are a few things that went on in the story, and I do have one more really crazy character. She is something. This is the woman whose estate Mr. Collins and his new bride, Miss Charlotte, go off to tend. This woman is exceedingly rich and exceedingly snobbish. She is the aunt of Fitzwilliam Darcy, who is very, very well off, may I tell you. So I've told you a little bit about the personalities. But Mr. Darcy inherited all of his fabulous wealth through the family line, which is the exquisitely proper and most desirable way to get a husband. Then Mr. Bingley, he's very nice and all, but his family got their money through trade, so it's not exactly as desirable, although the money's not bad. Then, of course, we have Mr. Collins, who's the blue-collar minister who has no calling of God and is just doing what he's trying to do because it's all he can do. And really, his calling is to go fawn over Mrs. Catherine de Bourgh, and she's going to be represented by Ghostly Greetings. And Mr. Wickham is our soldier, and, of course, he's being paid by the army. Oh, but Ghostly Greetings and this grande dame of the manor who is nasty, nasty, nasty to Elizabeth. But if you do not understand the subtleties of the language and the dialogue, you'll never really see what's going on. Anyway, she thinks that her daughter, who I didn't pull a bar for, who is very mousy and very timid, obviously, with a mother that overbearing, that this little slip of a girl who only hides in the corner and quivers at her mother's words, that girl is going to marry Darcy. Well, Darcy surprises her at the end, and that is not what happens. But anyway, Ghostly Greetings is very good for the overbearing Catherine, and our servile Mr. Collins can never get enough of Madame Marvelous Catherine de Bourgh. He's always talking about her. So let's go on to a little bit about the setting. So we do have the place where the 5 girls and the Bennets are living. That is called Longbourn, and that is a very nice, probably what we would call a middle upper class type place where they have a few servants, they have a nice home. It's nothing that's too in disrepair, but it's definitely nothing grand. I think Grandma's Orchard because it's very homey and just a nice setting. I've always enjoyed the way that they film this movie and the way that things are described in the book. It seems reasonably homey, so I picked that for that. Then I picked World Traveler for Rosings, which is the very amazingly imposing estate that Mrs. Catherine de Bourgh has, and this is a very sophisticated old world type scent. Where the Grandma's Orchard is homey and rich with apples and wood and all that, this one is very oak and dark berries and incense. And please just ignore my dogs. Then, of course, we need to go to Pemberley, which is Mr. Bingley's estate. I'm pretty sure I have that right. There are so many different places. And when I think of Pemberley, I just think of a little bit of elegance and a lot of good fun because they definitely do a lot of balls and things there. And Plum and White Woods is elegant and refined and tailored, and it seems to be a house that is in good taste. And then, of course, we have, oh, did I mess that up? Is Pemberley where Mr. Oh, good night. Netherfield, I'm sorry. Netherfield is Plum and White Woods. Forgive me, if you really know the book, you're probably booing me right now. Netherfield is where Bingley is. Pemberley is what beautiful, magnificent estate Mr. Darcy has. And that goes with Vanilla Oud, which is the very best. Oh, I've been saving this and Mystery Man for years, you guys, to be able to put this on the channel this way. So, Vanilla Oud is dark and sophisticated, and when Elizabeth goes to tour the Grand Estate, because many of these very, very amazing homes are open to the public to be able to come and see your statuary and your flower beds and your gigantic rolling English pastures and all these things that you have if you are an aristocrat. This, in every movie, makes me think of what I wanted to share to go with Pemberley. And what is amazing is that Mrs. Catherine de Bourgh is always saying how her daughter, whose name is escaping me, is going to inherit this. And, Darcy's going to take her and all this. And Elizabeth is going through as almost mistreated low-class person enjoying this whole estate, and in a little while at the end, she's going to inherit this whole deal by marrying Mr. Darcy. It's just fantastic. So, of course, there are lots of things that they share as far as repartee back and forth at different balls, and Midnight Masquerade will be very good for that. It's mysterious, like the initial interactions between Elizabeth and Darcy, because they aren't really sure about each other, but there's something there. So I think this is very good. And then, of course, at least in the movie, there is this scene in the rain where they're trying to work things out, and they're fighting, and they're this, and they're that. So I thought that summer rain, plus we're in England and it rains all the time, would be another thing that would be good for the setting. Oh, it's so pretty. And all I can really tell you is that Pride and Prejudice, it lasts and lasts because it was so well done. It really looks into the character of human beings, sets them against each other in ways that really grate on your nerves, and then brings resolution so that at the end you are just so happy with Elizabeth and Darcy getting together, even though they bicker like an old married couple, honestly, through the whole thing, and our happy little Jane and Mr. Bingley match, which I already quoted to you, that they'd be so sweet and so kind that all of their servants would rip them off and they wouldn't even know it. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. This was a very hard one to wrangle, and if you have any bars or any corrections about the plot, because it has been a long time since I truly read the book, please feel free to throw that in here. So I sincerely hope that you all have thoroughly enjoyed Pride and Prejudice as my May literary melting basket. God bless, guys. Ta-ta, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.